So when the dams came down, obviously it has changed the whole habitat for all life inside and around the river. It's like watching the flows. The river now has a heartbeat. So this is an opportunity for us as people to say, is this worth it? Should we be switching to something that isn't affecting the environment in a large way?
Welcome to Facing Future. All over the world, dams have been built without any thought to the detrimental effects that have devastated ecosystems, resulting in plummeting fish populations and causing great harm to the local cultures and wildlife that depended on the river. Two such dams were built in the early 1900s, blocking the Elwha River in Washington state. And it took over 100 years for the dams to finally get removed, thanks to the efforts of the Elwha people and others. We're delighted today to welcome Vanessa Castle. She's the fish and wildlife technician and member of the Lower Elwha Clallam tribe. Welcome, Vanessa.
Thank you.
Vanessa, we enjoyed seeing you in the short film Beautiful Undammed, which is part of the Wild Hope film series. That we'll talk about more at the end of the program. But it was so exciting in this film to see the transformation of the landscape that you and others worked on after such a long struggle. Can you share with us a bit of what that process was like?
Yeah, so when the dams were in, the landscape was a sediment-starved landscape from the Elwha Dam down, where we had huge cobblestones. There wasn't any habitat for fish to spawn in. It was very hard to navigate for us as people and for the fish to navigate as fish to do their natural life cycle. So when the dams came down, we had a massive plume, 3 million cubic yards of sediment that pushed out the Elwha over time. And a lot of it deposited along the shores of our river, which created the river to completely reroute itself in a way that it wanted to. The river is now braiding in multiple channels, and it's mixed between sediment, fine pebbles, gravel, and sand and silt. And then also we still have big cobble in certain areas, which is what a river is supposed to look like when the ecosystem is healthy. So seeing that almost immediate change was absolutely amazing. And so it has changed the way that we work on the river and the work that we do. And obviously it has changed the whole habitat for all life inside and around the river.
Could you also talk a little bit, speaking of habitat, I mean, it was such a revelation to hear and see that the salmon actually lay their eggs in the pebbles, but the pebbles need to be flat and smooth.
I don't think necessarily they needed to be smoothed. I think that's the natural process of when you open up a river, rocks generally tumble down, and they automatically, when they have a path to travel downriver, they smooth themselves out. So that wasn't something that necessarily, they just weren't moving. Nothing was moving in the river because it was held still by these dams holding back water. So salmon, yes, they do need a specific gradient of sediment to spawn in, and each species picks different sediment to spawn in, whether it's a large Chinook or whether it's a small pink salmon. They'll spawn in different areas due to the sediment size. And so we've seen areas where a lot of coho or Chinook spawn, and then areas where the pink spawn, and those places could be dramatically different depending on the gradient of sediment. So it's very important for their life cycle.
So there were about 5 species of salmon originally, and now I think it's only the coho that's coming back, as well as 1 species of trout, or are there more species coming back?
There are more. So not only do we have multiple species, we historically had all 5 species of salmon in our river, but we have lost one of those species, and that's our sockeye run. They were lake spawning in Lake Sutherland, and they no longer exist. But also on top of that, we have multiple life histories of salmon. So like we'll have, for instance, different timing of runs, and they might be genetically different from one another, like where they spawn in the system and when they return. And so we have lost life histories of specific types of salmon also, even though we have other salmon. So it's not just the coho and the trout that have come back, but they have been the fastest to rebound. It's a slow process for salmon because a salmon's life cycle, they return every 3 to 6 years, depending on what type of salmon they are and when they choose to return. So we're only 2 to 3 generations in post dam removal. So even though some people expected it to be instantaneous when we took the dams out, that the fish would come back, we're only 2 generations of fish post dam removal. So it is a longer process than most people assume for
There's
the success.
also a whole part about the trout, and how the name of the trout changes from one place to another.
Well, the species of trout, they were rainbow trout, and then they became migrant trout.
So yeah, so we had rainbow trout landlocked behind the dam, and this was something that we least expected. As soon as we took the dams out, like 2 or 3 years later, we had a run of fish that we had never seen before, which was our summer steelhead. And our summer steelhead is a life history that we haven't seen we've only heard about it. As far as I know, the last I've heard about a summer steelhead coming in the river was in the 1950s. And so they were literally landlocked behind both of the dams. They were in our upper watershed. They're the most enthusiastic fish about when they return, as far as how far in the watershed they go. So 2 or 3 years post dam removal, we have this run of summer steelhead come into the river. And we all just kind of were like, what is going on? So when we start studying these fish and do genetics on it, I worked on the summer steelhead project, taking genetics off of the fish. And those genetics matched the rainbow trout that were stuck behind the dam. So they literally rose from the ashes. And it was the most beautiful thing to see. And, they're one of my favorite fish now because of that they had that in their genetics, in their life history, that just reignited as soon as we gave them a chance.
It's fascinating you use the term ashes, because I was just going to mention, this reminds me of smokers that, once they stop smoking, I've heard that their lungs really can rehabilitate quite a bit just by stopping smoking. So here the dam goes down, and then there's so much that can thrive in the environment.
Well, other species have come back as well, which is quite amazing. The critical to the ecosystem, even bear and the larger cats. Where did they come from? How did they say, wow, there's no dam anymore, let's get back there?
It's not that they necessarily returned, because they were always in our ecosystem. It's that they're recolonizing and rehabitating our lake beds, which were formerly flooded underwater. So they've moved into a territory. We've been watching their movements, and they've moved back into these territories where they used to go to, which are now revegetated with our efforts. So it's not that they came out of nowhere. It's that now they have access to these marine derived nutrients that they haven't had in over 100 years. So they are recolonizing the lake beds, and we are seeing that on our camera grid system that we run on the Elwha with wildlife, but they have always been there.
Can you talk a little bit about the nutrient express? I mean, how that, and then the native plants and so on and so forth. I mean, as I mentioned, there's just one step after another of seeing how the whole area starts to be replenished and thrive.
Yeah, the nutrient express is something that most scientists know about that work on salmon, that the marine derived nutrients that salmon eat when they're out in the ocean, when they return, they die on the riverbed, or they're taken by another animal like eagles, bears, things like that, and dragged into the forest. And when they are dragged into the forest, when they break down, those nutrients go into the ground and the plants uptake them. And we've been scientifically able to prove, we can see by core samples out of a tree close to the river when our good salmon runs were. Like this year was a good salmon run and this year was not as good because of the amount of growth within the tree from the nutrient uptake, which is really cool.
Yeah, nature has an amazing ability to recover. The dams, were built to provide irrigation and to the industries of that time, the early 1900s. But we still are using hydroelectric power around the world. Is there some replacement for these kind of large scale, enormous dams that do so much damage?
Yeah, so these dams specifically were not built for irrigation. These ones were specifically built for power, for the booming industry in Port Angeles to power our mills, our lumber and paper mills. So they have not done that for quite some time. They were providing a little bit of power to the grid, but they were so outdated that it wasn't much. Drops in the bucket compared to other hydroelectric dams. So there are many other, I know researchers are constantly trying to find ways to harness power that is and more environmentally friendly. There are now run-of-the-river hydroelectric systems that are very low, if not no impact on any species of salmon run or life form in rivers that I know they're using in British Columbia. I mean, obviously we all know about solar and wind and things like that, but I know they're studying tidal influence as well and seeing the effects of tidal influence power generation. So I'm really excited to see where these scientists go with more effective ways and low impact ways to our environment on how to create power, because power obviously is in our world. It's just a matter of if we can harness it.
Right. Well, I'll always be saying that we need to be using a lot less power than we are in this part of the world, the northern countries, the rich countries, ridiculous ships and yachts and, cruise ships, nonsense. Just, so anyway, but, if we use less, we should all be using less. Absolutely. So there are other dams. This project inspired other projects around the world. Really, in Europe, they're taking out hundreds of dams. There's a whole project in Europe that's called the Open Rivers Program, where they're taking out dams. And I understand that also near you on the Klamath and Snake Rivers, those dams are scheduled to come down as well.
So the Klamath are, the Snake are not. They're attempting with legislation. But so the Klamath rivers are coming down. They've already broke ground. They broke ground last month for their first dam, the Copco. And so that's really exciting. And we've gone down. I have personally gone down and met with the Yurok, the Hoopa, and the Kuruk, and got to meet them and tell them how excited we are for them. And share with them what we learned in our process, because we were one of the first, or the first. And so it was a learning process, and we wanted to share, what worked and what didn't, and what we forgot, and just things to think about for them as far as the process that happened, and make sure that we're constantly talking about, the ways that this works. They use the same process that we did. They waited for the dams to be up for leasing. And then took action there. And that's what happened with the Elwha dams as well. We waited until the lease was up, and then we fought for the relicensing of the dams. And so that's how they won as well.
Vanessa, I think the film mentioned as many as 800 dams have come down since the one where you live, and also that dam was actually the largest dam at that time to come down.
So it's not that it was the largest dam, it's the largest dam removal project in the world to date. We will be eclipsed by the Klamath dams because they're taking out 4 of them. So we will still be the first, but we will no longer be the largest, which is really exciting for us that we get to share that with the Klamath people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the Snake River also will if that goes through, will provide incredible amounts of irrigation and rewilding in that whole Pacific Northwest area. So we hope that also will happen.
Yeah.
A lot of these dams, it would have been very expensive to keep them up, to repair them. And in a way, I guess it was a win-win for the company not to have to continue doing that. They were probably you know, as you say, this was the sweet spot for taking them down. Do dams wear down? 100 years of concrete, is that just a natural process that they only have a lifespan, a certain lifespan?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Elwha dams were failing the structural engineering tests. And so that was what was based off of, like, the cost to repair the dams outweighed the cost to take them down, essentially. And these, as it said in the film, these concrete structures are coming to their life's end, because unless they are constantly upkept, they are just breaking down under the force of water. So their lives are literally coming to an end structurally. And so this time period, because a lot of dams were built during this era in the early 1900s. So they're all around the same age. And so structurally, they're probably all about the same as far as whether they're sound. So this is an opportunity for us as people to say, you know, is this worth it? You know, we be switching to something that isn't affecting the environment in a large way? And, you know, as scientists, we are, in the last 20 years, we are just learning the true effects of putting dams in these systems and actually stopping all of the sediment movement. And so the Elwha River restoration has been an amazing project just because it was one of the first. And we saw things that, you know, we disproved a lot of theories. A lot of places build dams for like flood retention and things like that. And something really cool and interesting about the Elwha now. So previously, when it used to flood, we would have these high flow events, large rain events, and the dams would hold back all of this water. And when they would let the water out, the flows of the Elwha River would go up and peak, and they'd open the floodgates, and it'd stay high, and we'd stay in these massive floods for long periods of time, like 1 to 2 weeks. And the whole valley would be flooded, which is where the reservation and our people are. And so these floods would be higher and they would last longer. And now the way that the floods happen is the river comes up, it peaks, and it comes straight back down just as fast as it went up. It flushes. And it's such a natural movement of water, and it only stays for like 1 or 2 days and then goes back out, and then all the floods are gone. And it's like watching the flows. The river now has a heartbeat and the way it's supposed to. And it completely disproved everything we thought. The longer flood events lasted when the dams were in. And that is opposite of what we've been told this whole time.
Wow, that's so interesting. The other thing about the dams is that they dammed up rivers and created these reservoirs where the reservoir would warm up and algae would bloom, and there would be some toxic results into that. And when it was drained, it became kind of a mud flat. And that had to be, you know, you and others were there planting the native species, replanting the native fir and other plants. The lupin came back of their own. I don't think you were planting those. I don't know.
We did seed some of them, but yeah, they are very good at multiplying themselves.
And they're
I
so
also
beautiful.
was interested to see about the removal of the invasive species.
Yeah, that's a big part of.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's a very big part of what we did, because we knew we had this disturbed area that was open for invasive species to move in. So we knew ahead of time, we had a plan ahead of time to remove as we go invasive species as we revegetated this area. And we learned a lot with revegetating. We didn't take into consideration that the river was going to continue moving the way it does. So a lot of the plants that we replanted were taken out over the years of the river just carving around and trying to find its new path. And until it stabilized, we weren't sure where that was going to be. So, but to date, we've planted over 420,000 plants in the lake beds.
Wow. 420,000?
Great. Wow, that's amazing. I understand there's also a moratorium that your people have agreed to for fishing in order to allow the fish population to recover. How long will that moratorium last?
So the moratorium has been on the river for over 10 years now, and the moratorium still is in effect and will stay in effect for the general population, but the tribe has agreed to open the river this fall for one species of fish, which is coho, for ceremonial fishing. And it's just for subsistence, for food, for ceremony. So that's really exciting for us as people, because now we can begin to heal.
And salmon has been on the endangered list. Certain salmon, certain places have been on endangered lists. I mean, do you feel that for people who eat fish, and especially salmon, that we should not be eating salmon at this time?
I think that is...
I mean, other than the tribe, other than the people who live there.
So no, I think you need to buy your salmon responsibly. I think you need to buy from sustainable harvesters, from that harvest from a good sustainable harvest run. I think we should not be eating farm fish. I think I've fought against the fish farms here, and thankfully there are no fish farms in our waters anymore. I think that we just need to make a responsible choice about where we're buying our fish and who we're buying it from.
Can you explain why you are opposed to fish farming? Because some people think this is a wonderful solution.
Well, I'm not against all fish farming, but I am against open water net pens. We've had some pretty major issues with open water net pens of Atlantic salmon in the Pacific Northwest, bringing diseases to our local fish that swim through these pens as juvenile fish. And unfortunately, our fish are exposed to sea lice, which eventually do kill our small fish when they swim through these net pens that are infected with sea lice and piscine reovirus and other things, as well as the things that they feed the fish with antibiotics in our waters that our natural wild fish are swimming through. So it's an issue with them being in our watersheds. They have a detrimental effect on our wild salmon.
It's another form of industrial agriculture with all of the attendant pesticides and antibiotics and horrors of industrial farming that we see in other animals. So
we had a very large net pen in Washington collapse a couple of years ago and release Atlantic salmon into the wild. And that was very detrimental. We had people out fishing them to try to get rid of them. And there were actually Atlantic salmon and then came into the Elwha River, into the watershed. And we extracted them. So
that's an invading salmon that you don't want in the river.
Correct.
Right. Okay. One of the things that you did, which we really loved, was that you brought children into the new environment, and they got to experience all of that revitalized landscape, which was very exciting for them.
Yeah, we put on summer camps we partner with Nature Bridge, and they do amazing outdoor education with our youth and with our tribal youth. And we try to get the youth out onto the river as much as possible to teach them about the cycle of fish, what fish eat, just everything that's been going on, because there's this whole generation of children now, as you saw in the film, that will never and have never seen this river dammed, which is absolutely beautiful to me.
I feel like I'm at home.
Well, Vanessa, this has been great to talk with you, and we really appreciate your being on Facing Future with us and telling us all this interesting stuff that we didn't know about rivers and salmon and so forth. And Sheila's going to explain a little about the series that you're part of.
Yeah, so this series called Wild Hope by Tangled Bank Studios. Tangled Bank also had the amazing film All That Breathes. That was an Oscar-winning documentary last year. But this series, actually has been on PBS. People can see it in the Nature series on PBS for free. It's both airing and streaming. And then also, amazingly, July 31st will be the premiere of the whole series, Wild Hope, on YouTube. And some of the other topics, let's see, I did see Does Nature Have Rights, which takes place in Ecuador. The Big Oyster, where there is now a cleaning up of riverbeds so that the oysters can come back, and they actually help clean the rivers. Salmon of the Gods, Beaver Fever, Coffee for Water, and Canine Conservationists. This is an 8-part series. In this particular episode, Vanessa, that you're in, apparently will be premiering on YouTube, I believe on August 28th. People can go to wildhope.tv for more information. They can pitch stories there. And also, sign up for more inspiration about, all of these amazing environmental solutions for problems. So thank you so much for being with us.
And thank you for having me. Hot and soon.